Pack it up, pack it in, let me begin. All this and more on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Pack it in.
Septandy Is Septover.
And tried and MegaTextured. All this and more coming up on this week's show.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
How you going, Dave?
I'm all right. I bought a new phone. I've sorted everything out. I mean, like 2 days of sorting things out. I'm not even joking. I was so out of date with things. I just let things slide. So 2 days fixing the new phone. But it's nice to be... It feels as if I'm back on top of technology again rather than being behind with it all. I'd accidentally gone retro with my mobile phone. Yeah. Dot, you might see Dot pottering around in the background. She's had an operation, so she has now... There will now be no more punctuation occurring. Let's put it that way. She's healing up in her guerrilla warfare costume, so you may see a stealthy cat in camouflage going past. And I've put a self-imposed ban on games until I catch up, but I'm nearly there. And I was tempted by your video. I was watching a video of you getting progressively more drunk yesterday. And it was fairly obvious because you finished a bottle of rum on the video. You did. And I was quite tempted by you going out and going to charity shops and picking up mostly PlayStation 3 games, was it mostly?
No, it was mostly Xbox 360 games with one PS3 game because I don't currently own a PS3. So if the game's are cross-platform, I'm buying the Xbox 360. But I'm going to have to get one because obviously it's the exclusives like the one that I show in the video, which was Resistance, Fall of Man. Fantastic game.
It's the same Xbox 360 as the PlayStation 3 era, is that right?
Yeah, same era. Yeah.
So you were commenting it's the last kind of physical, apart from Switch, it's the last kind of physical things. And I was so tempted. I was going, that's a brilliant idea, and I could get those cheap. I could start collecting those. Brilliant. I thought, hang on a minute, Dave. There's hundreds and thousands of games in the PC you haven't gone near. You don't need a PS3 or an Xbox to access those games that you haven't chosen to play before. But the old fear of missing out was being set off by your drunken mess of a video.
It was a bit of a mess.
Storm noises. He's storm noises going past.
I don't know what that was. And do you know what? Anyway, I think maybe it was a loose wire on my camera to the microphone. But it just came. Well, you heard in the video. It was just this static noise that came and went. And then last night, I was in this room, and suddenly my glass with some ice cubes in it just shook on the table. Right. So I think we just have to come to the conclusion this room's haunted. That's what it is.
Well, yeah, it's funny the noise because normally any noise like that in a video, and you're like, oh, I can't be bothered with this. Turn that off. It wasn't unpleasant. It was just slightly weird.
It just sort of came in. Blowing. And it did about 3 times, and I can't explain it. So it's an EMP. My camera is doubling up as an EMP meter, and the house is haunted. It's the only logical explanation.
How's your week been?
Yeah, not too bad. Other than making videos, whilst maybe that was after I've been to the pub as well. Anyway, enough about my videos.
You're definitely not sober.
Oh, it was. Interesting. I almost redid the video the next morning, and then I thought, no, let's just post it. Anyway, so what did I do on the weekend? So I on Saturday, went down to Fremantle to the Perth Games Festival, mainly because, so my son, Zach, he studies games art design at Murdoch University, and so he's part of as part of his projects, he's in a games development team with, who's in there? He's got Hugo, Gwen, and Freya, I think that's the whole team, and they've been working on a game called Stabbo Crabbo, so I went down to see what that was all about, which was really cool. And they've put the whole Australian. Stabbo Crabbo. Yeah. You basically it's sort of like a puzzle / sandbox game, and you control a crab that, for reasons unknown, has a knife, and you go around stabbing people on the beach. But there's reasons to stab the people.
But I feel like a crab holding a knife is quite credible. It sounds right, doesn't it?
Yeah, it happens all the time on Australian Beach. Just crabs running around with knives everywhere. Yeah, they're worse than the sharks. But yeah, so and they've put the whole blog of their development up. So they're not gonna do this as a commercial release. It's just for a project. But they put it all up on itch.io. So scuttlestudios.itch.io/stabbo-crabbo.
Promotion.
Yeah, promotion for a free game if you want to see what their project's doing. But no, really, really proud of them, to be honest. It's doing well.
Say Stabbo Crabbo in a really Australian accent.
I can't do a really Australian accent. Stabbo Crabbo.
You certainly can't. No, we'll have Tony complaining and
that's
Jason
true.
complaining about you.
Yeah. Well, he can do it himself on his own podcast.
Neil's away this week. He is right now doing a soldering workshop, or well, he's not doing it. Mark Fixie Stuff is doing a soldering workshop in the mill, so we couldn't make the recording today, where I think there's 8 or 10 people being taught how to solder by, I actually think Mark Fixie Stuff, despite what he says, Mark Fixie Stuff really is an expert. He knows what he's talking about. So they'll be taught how to solder. Shame I'm not closer, I would have gone. But he has asked us, to make people aware about the Retro Collective charity calendar. Now, Neil does a charity calendar every year. He doesn't make a penny from it. And actually, One Click Print have always printed the calendars for free. And they're sent out. The postage is covered as well. So everything you pay for goes to the charities. It's not proceeds to the charity. It's everything to the charity. You can participate in this if you want to. Each year the charity calendar has a loose theme to it, and there'll be 12 quite arty looking pictures of something retro in them each month. 12 each year, so one each month. So the theme this year is box games. Now, it's quite a loose theme, so you can take that anywhere you want. So Neil says celebrate the art, the manuals, the media with the physical joy of a box game. Get creative with your setting and arty with your photos, which need to be 1920 by 1080 minimum resolution. They need to be in landscape and space around the subject for him to crop. Do take part. All you need to do is send in the picture, and then if Neil likes it enough to be in the top 12, you'll put it there. There's usually, I think, a page at the back with some other pictures in it as well. And it's rmccalendarpics@gmail.com as soon as possible, because it's about to end. You've got less than a week to do it. The final deadline for submissions is Friday, October the 6th. So you've got less than a week to get those in. And the charity that he's chosen this year is Cirencester Opportunity Group. It's a local play group enabling children with special needs to play and learn with other children. So that's kind of in the same theme to what Lee did. Nice thing. So thank you. Neil says to thank the printers, One Click Print, for printing the calendars, and Heber Limited for dealing with the logistics as well. Yeah, join in if you can. Will you? I'm not going to do it because I don't have anything to set up to do it.
All those boxes behind you, Dave.
I know. I keep saying this year I'm definitely doing it. Next year I will. Yeah, definitely do the calendar.
I want to do this one, but he probably won't print the box that I want to photo, but I'm going to photograph it anyway. I think I'll do one that I want him to put in and one that he might actually put in. Yeah, and he can just have both.
Yeah, I think it's enjoyable to participate anyway.
Yeah, cool. Barbarian 1 and 2, of course. Right. This hobby of ours is often seen through rose-tinted glasses, and we recall getting our systems back in the day as life-changing events where everything was perfect from day one. And to a point, that's true. You couldn't rob us of the excitement of unwrapping a huge box on Christmas Day or birthday maybe, only to find that, yes, indeed, you are now the proud owner of the latest microcomputer or games console. Or maybe you'd saved your own pocket money or worked some extra paper rounds and you've just got back from the shop to unbox and set up the system you've waited so long for. However the system landed in your lap, it was often the case that unless you were lucky, all you had was the system, the gubbins in the box to make it go, the wires and all of that kind of stuff, and not much else. So while nothing was going to wipe the smile off our little faces, truth be told, our enjoyment for the first few days or even weeks was often limited to whatever pack-in games it came with. Some packs were great, but it seems not all packs were created equal. A story has been shared with us by Pajako6502, and it's about one such pack and a gamer's experience of revisiting the pack that came with his Spectrum Plus 2 in 1988. So the article is by Retro Arcadia on retroarcadia.blog, and it's about a pack called Soft 888, and it consisted of 6 games on cassette, and they were Punchy, Alien Destroyer, Treasure Island, Disco Dan, Crazy Golf, and Oh Mummy. And it's actually a really cool. I was gonna. You got some memories there, Dave. Yep.
Yes.
It's a really cool article actually, and it's about revisiting these limited titles and how good or bad they actually were, and how his enjoyment of the Plus 2 was limited to just these games and a pirated C90 tape from one of his friends with tons of games on it, but only one of them would actually load. But yeah, it really made me think about how day one with any new system really used to be either awesome or kind of average, depending on what you got in the box. Dave, I know we've discussed things like the Atari ST Power Pack before. Have you gone back and rediscovered the pack-in titles, and did they live up to your memories, or did they disappoint? Or even, I know you had an Amstrad CPC, were there pack-in games with that?
Definitely, I've been thinking about, pack-in games, and I'll explain in a bit more detail. And I don't think I caught this bug from you. I know that you're kind of doing that as well, but I don't think I got it from you. I think it was there the whole time. First of all, the ST, the Power Pack was great. For anyone who doesn't know, it was about 15 discs that came with the ST, with about 20 odd titles on them. Actually, decent, current, good titles for the ST. So you had things like Buggy Boy, like Outrun, like Gauntlet 2, like Double Dragon, all sorts of things on there. The only thing it didn't really have was a kind of a full-on flight sim, which is maybe a bit early for those, and it didn't have an RPG type game. But there was loads of stuff on there: Black Lamp Bamboozle, Return to Genesis, all sorts of stuff on there. And it was weird because it kind of set you up for a life on the high seas with 100% discount on games, because what you got, you didn't get a box with it. There was a little slip of paper manual, but all you got was 15 discs with what was on it written on the disc.
Right.
And if that was ever going to set you up for piracy, I mean, that's what piracy was like on the ST. So it was kind of set you down that road there. So I've not really forgotten about these games, because through the years, as I've emulated the ST and then played the ST, they've always been there. So it's not as if I'm rediscovering those, and there's nothing really to physically collect for those. It's not as if you can go out and you can buy the actual discs on eBay and then roll dice whether they'll work or not. But there's no real, I don't think there's a lot of nostalgia with the discs with the labels on them. And you can, I believe, get the Power Pack itself. But all it is it's a cardboard shell with cellophane holding them in. And I think once you open it, that's it done. So there's no real appeal in getting that. But things are a bit more interesting for me on the CPC. So there were pack-in stuff with the CPC, but it was system discs. And my dad took the instructions so seriously that he kept them in a safe and made copies, because that's what it told you to do. Usually it says make copies. You're like, I'll be fine. Yeah. No, he did that. And on it was a demo of what the system would do, and a demo of a game called Roland in Time, which was a sort of a Jet Set Willy type game, exploration game. But it was it was fairly basic what came with it. But we did get some compilations bought for us. And kind of in my head, those compilations that were bought for us were pack-in games, because they came with it, and they came later in Christmas and birthdays. But in my mind, a pack-in game is a game that you didn't choose yourself. That's there. So I've been recollecting them. And this is Amtix Accolades, which is Sweevo's World.
Nice.
Monty on the Run, Bounder, Starquake. There's other ones I've picked up as well. There's one that I haven't managed to get hold of. Amstrad 4-pack, which is Jet Set Willy, Manic Miner on it as well. But there's other ones I've managed to buy that I've had or were given to me. So there's these kind of compilations here. There's all sorts of games. Anteria, Jet Set Willys, and that again, 1942, Scooby-Doo, Fighting Warrior, Synapse, Eagle's Nest, Aliens,
Nice.
Cauldron 2, all sorts of games that they were given, which in my mind are kind of packing games. And I've been going back and getting hold of these on eBay. And I've also got the intention of making disc versions myself for them as well, because buying disc versions for the CPC is very expensive, and most of the time they don't work. So you're better off making your own. But yeah, packing games, I think it's fascinating because unlike other games that you chose yourself, you were given these games and you still end up having a connection to them.
I've recollected some similar stuff. I didn't find them too expensive. The weird ones for me.
No, they're not. They're not expensive either, because nobody really seems to want the compilations. I want them just because.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
What I remember having, and some of them are quite attractive. Most of the time, they're very kind of budget value, save some money kind of packaging orientated. So I understand why people don't want them so much, but I want them because I remember having them.
Yeah, and it's the same on the Spectrum. Like the tapes are pretty much, well, I always refer to them as free. Like they cost next to nothing to buy most Spectrum tapes if you're in the right Facebook groups. But when it comes to the +3 discs, the price is through the roof on a lot of those. So yeah. And I think they're just harder to get hold of because they were less made and less people bought them. So that's my theory anyway. I mean, I've talked at length before, obviously, about the Amiga 500 Batman pack. Great packing games. Not a lot if you just had the Batman pack. But, you know, you've got an arcade platformer in New Zealand Story. You've got a flight sim in F-18 Interceptor. And you've got Batman, which was just amazing. Plus, obviously, then you've got Deluxe Paint. That kept me entertained for hours as well. So that was great. My Spectrum +3, when we got that, we actually got the Chartbusters pack, which I think was a Dixon's initiative, he says, Rising Infliction. So that came with the Amsoft disc, which they all came with, which had about 6 titles on. And then the Chartbusters pack, which is another 6 games, things like Great Escape, Short Circuit, Cobra, I think, Yi Kung Fu. So some really, really good titles there. But the one, I really want to kind of bring this back to what if you really didn't get much at all. And the one that puts a smile on my face for all the wrong reasons is, what if for Christmas, when you wanted a Commodore 64, or maybe you wanted a ZX Spectrum 48K, instead what you unwrapped was the Acorn Electron with nothing but the introductory cassette. Do you remember that? Do you remember seeing that at all? So it's a lovely brown, a really enticing brown cardboard box that the introductory cassette comes in. Nothing enticing on the front or back whatsoever, and no real information on the inside either. That's just kind of blank. So you actually have to go into your user guide for the Acorn Electron, and I'm sure you've all got your user guide, so if you'd like to turn with me to section 4, which is on page 9, you'll get all the information about the introductory cassette. And funnily enough, it's the dirtiest page in this entire, most of this manual looks like it's never been read apart from these pages. So everybody clearly just turned to the information about the introductory cassette. So what did you get on you? You've just unwrapped it for Christmas. It's not the machine you really wanted, but it's what you've got. This is all you've got to entertain yourself for the next few days until the shops open. There's a program called Keyboard, which apparently teaches you how to use the keyboard. There's a program called Sketch, so a bit of a drawing package. There's Piano, so you can make yourself some music by stabbing at the keyboard, which you've now just learned how to use. There's Dodgems, so there is a game, and it's a bit like Dodgems was an Atari 2600 game, I think. You had a maze, so it's not as exciting as it sounds. There's like a maze, so you think it's Pac-Man, but then you realize you're basically controlling a car. One's going one way clockwise, the other one's going anti-clockwise, and you have to try and avoid, by swapping lanes. Don't know if you remember that. But that's Dodgems. What else we got? You got. Sorry, I'm just have to put my glasses on. It's getting serious now. I can't actually read this without my glasses. Okay, you got biorhythms. You can plot your biorhythms. So it's like a Fitbit in Acorn Electron. Clock. There you go. You can program the time. Gamoku, no idea. It was like a board game apparently. Message, patterns. Anyway, the one good game on here, in my view, some people might have very fond memories of the introductory cassette, and I've just ripped into it. But you got Mars Lander, so that's just a rip-off of Lunar Lander, but it's essentially the same game. And we had hours of fun, not just landing the thing, but when we got bored of that, we'd just try and see how fast we could make it impact, because it would tell you how fast you were going. So that kind of turned into a sub-game for us. Which was great fun. Bug Zap, so a bit of a shooter. Island and Planets, which is just a animation. So imagine that. You've got an Acorn Electron for Christmas, and that is all you've got until the shops open for the Boxing Day sales.
I reckon you'd be all right. I reckon there's enough. I remember when I got my 6128 and there was the demo disc with it, the demonstration of what the Amstrad could do. I was fascinated by it, and it wasn't even sophisticated. It wasn't like a demo you'd see from the scene. It was just basic routines to draw stuff. I was still fascinated by it, but I don't think when I got the ST the second time around, I got a micro. I don't think it would have helped there. I think the ST came with loads of games, and that was a good thing. I couldn't have sat and watched a demonstration the second time around, but the first time you got your own micro in your own home, I would have been fine with that until the shops opened. Yeah. And I bought Elite.
Nice. Yeah, it would be the same with the Amiga. I mean, imagine being stuck just with Workbench and nothing else. Not even Deluxe Pack, just Workbench. I mean, how many times can you make it swear and still be entertained? Okay, there's a couple of days worth in there, maybe. But yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, the more I actually read this article and looked at those games from this soft 888 pack, the more bells were actually ringing, and Alien Destroyer and Treasure Island were definitely unlocking some memories. So I think maybe my mate Steve or possibly another friend Sean, they had Spectrum Plus 2s before I got my 3. So maybe they got those games and I played them at their houses. And in fact, I hit Steve up with a photo and asked him if he remembers them. And he said he remembers some of them. So maybe it was at his house. I don't know. I mean, the truth is back then we were just happy that any game actually managed to load at all. So, but I'm just even to this day, I'm a big fan of pack-ins. And to be honest, it's another reason why I've not bothered jumping on board with the PS5 yet. No one's selling an attractive bundle. And so, to get my cash, Sony, you have to compete with memories of November 1989, Amiga 500 Batman pack. So lift your game.
We are sponsored, thank you very much, by Pixel Addict magazine. But today, let's talk about something they're doing, which is a one-off special called Amstrad Addict. Neil isn't here today, but I know he's excited about it, and I'm excited about it. Really, actually, properly excited when I heard about it. A whole magazine with Amstrad getting the pixel treatment. Neil and I, and in fact Duncan, producer Duncan, who's editing this right now, are all Amstrad fans, and it doesn't get a lot of attention, and we feel it should get a bit more. So this magazine is a one-off special. Well, I say one-off, they've no plans to do another one. Maybe if everyone buys it, they'll do more. And there is a huge, massive, big scoop. They've got an actual interview with Lord Alan Sugar in it. Now that's...
Oh, wow.
Totally unexpected. Yeah, it's totally unexpected. As far as I know, I've never come across him talk about the CPC in any real detail or depth. He mentions it, he'll tweet about it. But, I mean, really fascinating to hear from him about it, because when I look back at the CPC compared to what Amstrad did before it, Amstrad were doing stereos that were famously the Mugs iFool, this is what people want their stereo to look like, and they're not so bothered with what's inside. And you could say that about the CPC because it's designed to look like a powerful microcomputer with the proper keyboard rather than what you saw in the Spectrum and elsewhere, and it had the color-coded keys and so on, but it was a very competent computer. It was very powerful, reliable, well-made, and all the rest of it, and I don't really understand why Amstrad made it so well. I mean, the monitor is great quality as well. They could have gone a lot cheaper on it. But also, Roland Perry's been interviewed, who's felt to be the father of the machine. In fact, the Amstrad character Roland, I mentioned earlier on, Roland in Time, from all those Amsoft games, is named after Roland. So you can pre-order it now. Go to pixel.addict.media. It's got a wonderful cover, which I'm sure Duncan has scrolled past, which has so many little details on it. I've already pre-ordered my copy. I hope it's successful. I hope it does well. And I did ask myself a question: what if you're not a big CPC fan? Would this be good for you? I think it would. I think they've gone for a broad level of CPC content, so I think it'd be interesting for people who even aren't CPC fans or don't know a great deal about it. Did you look at it at all?
I looked at the cover art. Yes.
Yeah.
Look fantastic.
There's not obviously there's nothing to read yet other than what's going to be inside it, but I'm really excited by it. So thank you very much for sponsoring us, Pixel Addict. Of course, they have their own magazine, but Amstrad Addict, really excited about. It will surprise no one to hear that I'm not an expert on anything. There's a few things I know about and lots of things that I can blag my way through, but there's some things I'm mostly ignorant about this week. I've picked one. A couple of submissions maybe do this. The first is from G7VFY, who links the hashtag Septandy. So September and Tandy as a portmanteau, is that the right word for it? Which on YouTube will give you a list of hundreds of videos which are tagged with that. And it goes over the past 4 years, perhaps longer. The idea with it is a way to encourage some Tandy coverage and to get creators to choose to do Tandy in September, and also to find a way to get people to find other Tandy content easily. And the second was from MC Hellspawn, who said they grew up with and love the Tandy and would like us to cover it. So as far as that's concerned, we'll cover what people submit. So if people submit it to the subreddit, then there's more chance of us talking about it. So if you want Tandy stuff covered, then submit it. Now, I've been dipping in and out of it. There's loads of stuff going on, so do have a look through there, click through the video, see what takes your fancy. But here's a quick Tandy 101 for anyone who, like me, who isn't too well informed. So the first one was the TRS-80. It's a mono thing with a built-in monitor. It looks a bit like a Commodore PET, but I think it looks a bit nicer. And it's not the keyboard's separate. It's not joined to the main unit. And in fact, it's one of the three micros from 1977. The Commodore PET, the Apple II, and the TRS-80 were the three home micros that came out that were really the first mainstream ones that didn't come from a kit. Not so popular in the UK. We didn't appear to have the disposable income for them, but they were relatively popular in the USA. It took the next kind of generation for it to get really popular. Tandy had an advantage because Tandy had hundreds of retail shops to sell them in. And they later renamed that one to the Model 1 because they came out with other successors to it. They also came out with the TRS-80 color computer, which is not backwards compatible. And I did pronounce that without the U, as is the fashion in America in the word color. I think they were nicknamed the Trash 80, and I kind of liked the name until I found that some fans don't like you being called that, so I don't want to upset anyone, so I don't call them that. But what people tend to call it, and I think a really nice name for them, is the Coco. Coco, what a nice name for it. The color computer. And they went wedge for these, and they first came out, I think, in 1980. They're quite basic. I mean, they're not like the C64. They've not got a full chipset of co-processors going on, and they're not as graphically powerful as the CPC. And in fact, I would put them as the North American equivalent of the Spectrum. They were quite inexpensive. They were a bit, no offense to the Spectrum, but they were a bit nicer to type on. Didn't have those rubber slab keys, the chiclet ones, as they're so called. but they were very inexpensive. But they do have a big following of people who are who love them for what they are, what they were when they had them. They succeeded with the Coco 2 and the Coco 3. The Coco 2 was mostly a cost down, and the Coco 3 was a bit of an expansion. It could run faster if it wanted to, and had better graphics. But they were still compatible with the models below, and throughout the series they were inexpensive. And they're also closely related, of course, to the Wales answer to micros, the Dragon 32. So the Dragon 32 and 64, that was the worst Welsh accent anyone's ever done. The Dragon 32 and the 64 were produced to the same spec. Now, they get called clones sometimes of the Coco, and it's wrong to say that because the Coco was built to a Motorola spec and the Dragon was built to a Motorola spec, so they're brother and sister perhaps, but I don't think it's fair to call them clones. So a lot of what you have in Septandy is on the TRS-80 series and the Coco, but that's not all, because the other big Tandy thing is the Tandy 1000, which is a sort of remake of IBM's IBM Junior, which was a failed attempt by IBM to bring a kind of lower cost IBM out for home users. The Tandy 1000 was more or less North America only. I mean, you could get it here, but it didn't really take off. So we didn't really see it here, but it did leave its mark. When I get into PCs, I kept seeing reference to Tandy sound and Tandy graphics. So what was going on here was that Tandy was filling the gap that the PC had because it didn't really have good sound or graphics at that point, and they made their own specification, and it was called Tandy compatible there. And of course, that lasted until we got VGA, AdLib, and Sound Blasters, and it was left behind. But I think it's fair to say that Tandy 1000 opened the door for a lot of games on the PC. The IBM Junior kind of opened the door and then went away, and Tandy 1000 came in its place. And of course, there was a series of these as well. And there's also the Pocket Computer 2, which had limited success. And I know nothing about, but mostly it tends to be the Tandy 1000 series and the TRS-80 and the Coco. The Tandy is a big deal in North America. TRS is Tandy Radio Shack. I think it was Radio Shack branded stores, and in the UK we get Tandy branded stores. And you could buy all sorts of stuff. That's where you would go for components before the internet. But when the internet came about and they started leaning into selling electronics tat rather than that kind of thing, eventually it died off and we lost them all. Now, Chris, I would assume you haven't come across the micros, but did you hear about them at all, and did you use the shops?
I don't. I've got no conscious recollections of the machines, the micros, and that's not to say. Did we get them in the UK? Did they actually come out? Because what I remember, there was lots of things that looked kind of like a BBC micro or slightly smaller versions, and I never knew what they actually were. So, do you know what I mean?
I don't know if it surely they would have sold them or tried to sell them at some point through its life. You would have thought so, but they didn't. They certainly didn't catch on. They weren't popular like lots of other things.
Yeah,
it was the same. I think it was the problem was that if you took a micro back then from its home country and took it somewhere else, the price went up, and then it just couldn't compete with the home ones. Yeah. That's why the Spectrum didn't really catch on in the USA, and the USA ones were undercut by the Spectrum. And really only the Commodore 64 existed in both places, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so I mean, it's possible I touched one in a shop, but like I say, no conscious memories of that brand. But certainly the shops, I absolutely loved Tandy as a shop, and I used to use it to get cables and connectors and stuff like that. And I was actually quite sad to see it close. I think they closed down, from my research, around 99, 2000 was the final death knell. I think they were merged into Carphone Warehouse, from what I read on the internet earlier. And that's probably when the TAT started to come in as well. Although I do remember that sort of selling a combination of TAT and useful components. But I was actually quite pleased. So I'd seen them close down in the UK. And then when I moved to Australia at the end of 2002, they were actually still here. They were still in fact, in one of the first shopping centres I went into, there was a Tandy store right by the entrance. So that was really cool. And it was as I'd remembered it. You know, it had the components, the cables, everything that I would have gone for gone to Tandy for in the UK, that's what I could buy in Australia. So it was great. But it didn't last very long because they were phased out. They were actually bought out over here, which is why they survived a bit longer. They were bought out by Woolworths, which over here is a supermarket. Is what Woolworths is over here. But so they were owned by Woolworths, and then they were just generally slowly phased out. And I think by about 2011, they were all gone. We do have, it's interesting to say about the internet, because the internet's definitely the cheapest place to get components, and especially if you're buying in bulk. But we've got what I would call modern equivalents of Tandy over here, and they're surviving very well. And the two stores I'm thinking of are J-Car and Altronics. And Altronics, still, you can pick up their catalogue. It's a massive fat book, and it's just got every component you could ever think of. It's not quite true, but it's got a lot of stuff. And they're aiming it at hobbyists, a bit like us, and they'll have like project suggestions, like building a mini arcade cab from a Raspberry Pi, for example. So Altronics are really good. J-Car is kind of, they're a bit what Tandy UK became, because they still have trays and trays of useful components, and they also have a whole spectrum of complete and utter tat that they'll happily sell you, especially on the run up to Christmas. So, but yeah, love it. And I'll still pop into either of those two to grab my D9 and D25 connectors. Sadly, neither of them have D23s. Boo.
What a weird thing to want a D23. Why would you possibly want that?
What machine has that connection? I can't think.
I wonder if there's now, if you say there's, you think there are, if there's two shops in Australia that still sell components, I wonder if I'm just an idiot and there are shops in the UK that do sell components, because I wouldn't even think about going anywhere else other than eBay, Mouser, DigiKey, etc., CPC Farnell to get the components. Wouldn't cross my mind to look in a shop for them, because I assume they're all gone, but maybe someone can correct me. Maybe some of them do exist. Now, going back to the start of the story, though, what about any other hashtag months? Have you watched any of those happen before?
December is the one that springs to mind straight away. I've never participated in one, but I think it's a really cool way to sort of just bring a topic together, kind of brings a community together, if you like. Everybody sort of concentrating on the same thing, a bit like video responses. And I've now got the 386 set up. I'm literally just thinking now, so I could actually participate in December this year. Maybe that would be good fun.
I'm not sure which came first, whether it was December or Septandy came first. I wonder if someone could maybe answer that in the comments. But I think they're the big two, and there's lots of attempts to get other things going on. But I think they're the big two, December and Septandy. And I as much as I like December, I kind of like Septandy, because the Tandy community is much smaller, and it's a nice, friendly, cozy community. It's nice to see them kind of spread their wings and do something as big as this that everyone can see. And what I get from watching YouTube videos and old micros isn't, I'm not just looking to find out what's the most powerful one they had and the Sharp X68000. I get a lot from hearing people who are really fond of them talk about them and what their memories are and all the rest of it. That's what I get from Septandy. There's such a kind community around the Coco, especially when they team up with the Dragon community, because it was like separated at birth kind of thing. They existed and they didn't really know about each other back in the day, and now it's like, oh yeah, there's a whole community into the same thing we are across the pond. So it's nice that way. And if you want more of that, there's a Coco show, which may be familiar to lots of our listeners who are back from the Amigos days, because it's part of the Amigos network, the Coco Show. Give that a wee listen if you want. As for the hashtag, go and click on it. In previous years, there's been a playlist made up for the whole year's submissions. I can't find one right now, but as we're recording it, it's the 25th, so it's not quite the end of the month. This has been broadcast on the last day of Septandy, so maybe there's a playlist will appear. And if it's the case, I'll add it on to the description, or I'll add it on as a pinned comment.
Let's go into the housekeeping.
Housekeeping this week. There are some stories that I noticed might be worth a look. There is the top submission this week at the time I looked is a picture of a pile of Pixel Addict magazines beside someone's bed with the, and they just captioned it, "Real men keep Pixel Addict by the bed." And it obviously it's a bit of fun, but I'm surprised that other people enjoy it as well. So yeah, Pixel Addict, keep it beside your bed. There is a link to the 6502 song, which I'm afraid I clicked out of within a few seconds, and my cringe went too high on it. It's a song about the 6502, and a link to Daughter Reacts to Mega Drive, and that's something that we're seeing a lot of that now. Is get young people to look at old tech and see how they respond to it, and film their exaggerated responses to it. And there is Base MX. Now, did you read what Base MX is, Chris?
I did. I thought you might pass to me with that question on this. It seems to be a sensible way of bringing the stereo, the beautiful stereo sound of Paula on the Amiga a bit more central. So not turning it in mono completely, because why would you do that? But bringing the bass sounds at least more center is what I understand of it. Is that correct? Yeah. It sounds very clever, actually.
You and I had a little bit of a discussion about this. I don't actually think we're disagreeing on it. I think you think we're disagreeing, but I don't think we are.
I don't. Yeah. Well, yes and no. I'm disagreeing with whether or not we're disagreeing.
The Paula sound chip on the Amiga has 4 channels, and they have been routed to 2 on the left and 2 on the right. And if you want to make music on the Amiga, you've only got 4 channels. You will not do those to do those in proper stereo. You then drop down to 2 channels because you need to duplicate it on both channels. Yeah. And most of the time that doesn't happen. So most of the time they use 4 channels really as if they're all in the center. And that's why people like Hoffman, for example, thinks the Amiga sound better in mono. And I do agree. If you've only got the 2 options, if you've only got hard separation where a lot of the time it's not meant to be separated, or you've got mono, I would choose the mono. But there are games, you've mentioned quite a few games where the games themselves use left and right. And obviously, they do. If you take that away, you lose that stereo separation. Yeah. But Base MX was posted to the subreddit by the creator. There's a link. There'll be a link there with. He's got sound samples of it as well, and what he's thought is that the bass sounds sound wrong if they're hard separated. So he's trying to put those in the center, and that makes a bit of a difference. I have just converted all channels to mono and center. In other words, they're on both speakers, and Chris is outraged at me for it. Furious. I was. He will never forgive me.
I was actually surprised. The reality is I was surprised because, and I'm going to stand by a comment I put in the Discord chat, which a couple of people found quite amusing and thought I was going crazy. But the stereo sound, for me, when I first discovered it and listened to it, and realized the difference, was like VR for my ears. It was like, and so the Amiga, whilst there are, some limitations in, like you discussed there, how it separates it, as soon as I realized that it had 2 separate channels, I found an amp and I plugged my Amiga into nice big stereo speakers, and it never changed. So for me, I'd gone from mono sound through the RF modulator to having this near VR experience, and so it was actually surprising that somebody would want to reverse it, because for me it was like, what are you doing? Like, that's one of the best things. But I get where you're coming from, and I think what it also comes down to is, well, in some instances, I know, like musicians for games, they were forced into, actually you've only got 1 channel, for your music, because the game taken up everything else, so there was not much they could do. But I think when you're playing with mods, and obviously what you've done is reversible, so you can switch back at any time. Yeah. But mods, because you only have to spend like 10 minutes in Soundtrack or a Pro Tracker, same thing, to understand how these channels work and how you would center something and its sound in balance, because you'd basically put that same sound in 2 channels, 1 left, 1 right, and you'd bring the volume down a little bit because now it's louder because it's playing. Yeah. So you bring the volume down a bit, and then you can, because you can tweak the volume, You can have some nice bouncing around stuff, bouncing from left to right purposefully. And also you can pan by, again, adjusting the volume over time. So a good mod track uses how the Amiga does music to create something amazing, to create something beautiful that you just don't quite get in any other area of music.
It could. I mean, a good mod track could if it chose to. On the other hand, a good mod track might say, I need all 4 channels all the time because I've got lots going on in it. And I know that in later games, like Turrican 2 on the Amiga, had this, it was actually ported from the Atari ST. The sound for it, what they did for the ST was they condensed things into several channels into one kind of thing. So for the Amiga, they ended up, I think, with 7 channels instead of 4.
Right.
I'm not sure my details are correct in that, but the idea is there. They managed to condense it down. So I guess if you had the CPU cycles for it, you could end up with a game on the Amiga that had stereo, that had the music in both sides, and panning if you wanted, and you had sound effects on both sides. But of course, what we often got on the ST and the Amiga was the horrible disappointment of choosing between music or SFX.
Oh, that's just the reality of it. Yeah, just the reality. Look, some of our favorite games, Lotus, fantastic. Choosing your own soundtrack in Lotus, like you're using the car stereo. But if you did that, you didn't even hear the engine. And if you're into racing, you got to hear the engine. You got to hear the engine. Yeah. Just limitations of the day. Anyway, turn it back into stereo. Let's move on. As you know, Dave, I've no issues running my old machines on modern flat panel displays, and I know you love that. But where I do draw the line, and I've mentioned it before.
Nothing wrong with it.
No, there's nothing wrong with it. But I draw the line at the N64 because it just looks hideous on a flat screen. And I know the N64 isn't everybody's cup of tea, but I've got so much love for the system and really fond memories of it as well. It just looks so bad on a flat panel. So it's the main one that's plugged into a CRT TV that I've got in the corner. It's really pixelated and blurry when you look at it. And the flat panel somehow makes that more obvious, even though it looks acceptable on a CRT. The reason is the N64 games look so blurry is basically most games on the N64 are 3D poly, as we know, with texture mapping, but the texture maps are very low resolution. So that's where you get the blurriness coming in from. But not anymore, thanks to some work by a very clever chap called James Lambert. What James has done is take the principle of MegaTextures, ID Software's method of swapping out textures depending on how close you are to a surface, and he's applied this to the N64. Details are all in a video that he's put out, and he's rocking 40 meg of image data in this demo that he's put together, and the max texture map size is 1024 by 1024, and this is on an N64, remember, so you got texture maps of 1024 by 1024 with obviously different scaled down versions that will be viewed when you're further away from the surface. So the closer you get, the clearer the image. That's how it works. The scene he shows in his tech demo is like the inside of an ancient building with pews and stained glass windows and some really nice texture throughout. It looks absolutely stunning. In his video, James openly discusses how he gets textures to load only when being looked at, because you've only got 4 meg of RAM. So even though you've got your 40 meg of image data, you still got to process that through 4 meg of RAM. And he talks very openly as well about the trade-offs in terms of you've only got a limited number of textures because they're higher resolution, and you've also got to work with a reduced poly count as well. Far below what the N64 can actually push out. So, no, you're not going to use this technique to upscale GoldenEye or Perfect Dark. Okay, it's just a tech demo. It's a proof of concept, and James is very clear about that. But as he mentions, you could easily make a game for the N64 using this technique. You just have to make some design choices about the scale of the game, the play area, or you're going to have to repeat the same textures. So the game is going to have a very similar look throughout. Dave, I think we'll both agree this is pretty amazing to see coming out of an N64. But what do you think about making these old systems do things they never did? Does it kind of break the nostalgia?
No, I don't think it does. As to this in particular, I think one of the important things that comes out of this, and you did touch on this, he's not saying N64 games could look like this, because while they could look like this, he's showing it. You couldn't get a game to do that because you couldn't get all you need to do is a game there. So he's not saying the games could look like this. He's not saying you can make a game like GoldenEye 007. You could improve it that way. So there's that there. But I don't. People are innovative. People find things that they can do.
Yeah.
So maybe someone will take that technique and they'll make a game that works around it, and you end up with a game that really doesn't feel as if it's limited, and it ends up with these wonderful textures. As far as breaking nostalgia and so on, I like it as long as they can do it without cheating. So I think, was it Dragon's Lair there was a ZX81 Dragon's Lair? It was a machine that had no business playing it, but really it was being fed the video. So it was almost cheating, if you mean. It wasn't doing it itself. And it was being fed the video, I think, from something like an SD card with a capacity that they couldn't dream of. And you sometimes see machines with Raspberry Pi add-ins in there. And when you look at how powerful the Raspberry Pi is, it's 100 times more powerful than the machine itself, if not more. And it feels a wee bit funny there. I'm okay with the Raspberry Pi.
Yeah,
I'm okay with the Raspberry Pi. So the Amiga's got the Pi Storm. Yeah, I'm actually okay with that because.
Okay.
I'm okay with that because it's doing a co-processor thing, and then the rest of the Amiga chips are still being used. So I'm okay with that. But there's a point at which it kind of crosses over and turns into, really, is this just is the computer now that the old micro just really an I/O backplane while something else is just totally taking control? But I do like pushing the games to the limit. We saw that with the CPC game Pinball Dreams. Pinball Dreams was an Amiga and PC game. It was Amiga first, and the PC version, it came out at a point where the PC was more capable. So the PC version is not a downgrade on the Amiga. They're both basically the same.
They are.
But someone did it for the Amstrad CPC, and it is phenomenal. It's so good. I mean, it's got it's just absolutely amazing what they can do when they push it to the limit. And you've got Vespertino coming up for the CPC. Has been coming up for years and years, and in fact it was mentioned in that it's going to be mentioned in the Amstrad Addict magazine, but Vespertino and so on, pushing it to the limit. I love to see machines being pushed to their limits. I heard you talking about things like, is it Gloom and Doom and Dread
on the A500.
It's fascinating to see those things being done. I don't think they always end up being the best of games because they're in the shadow of what they're trying to do, but it's fascinating to see someone saying, right, let's get the hardware to do just a little bit more. It's almost really what the demo scene's always been trying to do. So I do enjoy seeing things being pushed to the limit.
It always makes me think about graphics versus gameplay. I mean, as he discusses in the video, there is a trade-off. If you wanted to make a game, it's going to be quite limited. And so, you're really making a choice. Do I want it to look good or do I want it to play good? And, and back in the day, when we got an N64 or even, before that in the micros and stuff that we always talked about, the gameplay was there because it had to be good gameplay because the graphics weren't. And you got the imagination gap, which you often talk about, you know, and that works. It's our brain doing the processing, if you like, to make what is on screen appear better to our brains than it actually is. Sort of more engaging. So here's a choice. You mentioned Dread on the A500, and that's a good example of a project that's not stalled. That would be me speaking out of turn, but I think what's happened is Dread has become the engine, and is Grind the name of the game? I can't remember what it was called.
Oh, I don't know. But
basically, it's kind of split. So you got the engine, and now they're still working on a game, and I really hope that does move forward to completion. I'm still waiting on a boxed game that I can play, and again, that's amazing seeing. You have to remind yourself it's an Amiga 500 and how limited that is. Because yes, the Amiga did have first-person shooters, but any of the good ones, they were on the AGA machines. And they really do need, I'm going to say the word need, most of them need an accelerator to really engage with them. and then there's this freak of a programming, entity called Dread that is running on a stock Amiga 500. And the weird thing about that is, Dave, is that's amazing. But when I play it, it feels like I'm playing a PC game because FPSs of that caliber were only available on the PC. And it's like, this isn't right. I'm playing it. I love it, but it's the wrong machine in front of me. It's a weird thing, but I don't care. Don't stop developing it, guys. I want to play that game when it's completed. Back on topic to this N64 project by James. I really like it. It's jaw-dropping, and you have to remind yourself that this is being produced by an N64 because it's easy to forget. Do check out James's video, and as always, we'll put the links in the show notes. But also check out his channel, which is HappyCoder1989 on YouTube, because he's detailing his project to port Portal, no pun intended, onto the N64 as well, and he's made a lot of progress on that project, and that looks stunning. Thanks, James, for letting us use some of your footage in today's show, and also to user R Retro Hacking Mod 2 for linking this story in the subreddit. Without excellent submissions like this one, we literally would not have a show.
Last week, we talked about Starfield having some links to the classic space game Elite, and we asked you for your space-based gaming memories. Obviously, Elite will be popular here, and that's fine. But are there any other titles which took you out of this world? Did you and your friends discuss tactics for Elite, etc.? So let's have a look. The top one I have taken us out of contest mode.
Nice.
So the top answer is from MC Hellspawn. So that's twice he's been mentioned. And he says, does Descent count as a space game? Yes, it does. You're flying a ship around in full 3D space, so I think it does. You're right. I love that game. Spent many hours playing 1, 2, and 3. I am actually working now on building a period-correct rig to play these games. Good. Nice. And you'll find it's not too expensive or too difficult to do it. There's lots of hardware out there, and they're great games. You get the shooter plus you get the freedom of movement. It's amazing. Cool. Next.
The second one is Springs Glen, CRG, YouTube, CRG YT, sorry. Oddly enough, Elite is one of those games I've never played. I did, however, play an awful lot of Frontier Elite 2, good man, on my A1200. But everyone is familiar with that. So instead, I'll jump forward to 2003.2 Freelancer on the PC as a favourite. It was probably the first space game after Frontier that really pulled me in. Unlike Frontier, there is a story to play through, but it still does seem to have an element of open world freedom. You can run plenty of side quests in between the main campaign progress. And I think what I liked about it, compared to other space games of the time, was that it was a very simple game to just pick up and play, as in there's no big learning curve. I remember trying the X games around the same time, but could never get into them. They looked pretty, but were too complicated. Yeah, some good choices there. I played Freelancer for a little bit. Oddly enough, I didn't get into it. I was more into Frontier Elite 2. But yeah, cool.
Next one is Antiques for Geeks. It was a strange little title I picked up from a small computer shop on a back street, one of those transient ones that popped up for a year and then closed when the lease was up. Called Space Shuttle Simulator from Americana. The cover art was completely different to the game. It's never happened before, has it? You had to fly NASA's space shuttle to pick up and repair a satellite and then chase after Halley's Comet. The game was fiddly, and I could never get past the first stage. That's a common theme for these space simulator games. What's more, the game's never-ending toccata and fugue in D minor soundtrack soon wore me down, discouraging me from spending more time to master it. Still, when people talk about space games, it's the one I always remember. I bought Drop Zone the same day. I should have chosen that to talk about instead. Oh well, I'm out of time. I guess now I'll shut up. There's quite a few there. Lots of things mentioned. There's a few people mentioning Elite and talking about Witch Space and Thargoids. Jeff Minter's Sheep in Space. This gets said to read it out that way. Starglider mentioned a few times. Tau Ceti. Lots of stuff we mentioned. Wing Commander. Jacko talks about an Amiga public domain game, and there's loads of public domain games out there. So lots of space things out there. I've got games on the shelf that I wanted to get into, and at least now I know that with X and so on, that there is a good game there, so it is worth going through the pain, because you talked about games where, Glenn talked about games where there's that difficulty curve. You don't take to it right away.
Yeah. And
the problem with that is you're always thinking to yourself, I'm not enjoying this now. Is this really a good game? Is it worth me putting all this effort in, or is it going to be rubbish anyway? At least now with reviews and so on, we can find out it's worthwhile. It's a good game.
It's true. Right.
Do we have a question of the week for this week? What's the question?
I think we do. And it's one that we would have very little to say on, but I thought let's put it in anyway because it's got a following. Give us your Tandy memories. And that could be the machines, the shops, and if it was Retro Shack for you, throw that in. We don't care. Anything and everything, Tandy.
Radio Shack, not Retro Shack.
Oh, sorry. Oh, no, it wouldn't be Retro Shack back then, would it? We should open a shop called Retro Shack. Oh, that would be, and they could sell D23 connectors. That would be great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading what our North American listeners think about Tandy and so on Radio Shack, because that's something we didn't really have as much of. Anyway, thank you for listening. You can go to www.reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro to participate, or of course the links are in the show notes. Is that us? Are we finished?
I think we're done.
Is that it? The
Bye.
episode's over.
Thanks for
I'm
listening.
waving. Chris is waving. Chris is waving. Bye. See you next week.
Invisible dots waving.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC The Cave, Chris from 005 AGIMA, and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.